everyone, today I'm here at Genie Doi, an esports immigration lawyer, to talk about being a lawyer in esports. So first up, can you tell me about your specific area of practice in law and how you got into esports law?
Sure. So I'm an immigration lawyer, and before I was an esports immigration lawyer, most of my clients were like tech companies or startups that needed to hire engineers. And just for whatever reason, there aren't enough engineers in the
Hmm.
United States. And so a lot of our software engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, they come from overseas. And those people need visas in order to work in the United States legally. So I started helping those kinds of companies with their visa needs. And then how I got into esports was, I've always been a fan of video games. My husband works in the video game industry, and I was actually introduced to Bryce Blum, who's like my
Hmm.
boss and the founder of ESG Law, the world's first dedicated esports law firm. And he had, reached out and said he was looking for some help with immigration because a lot of his clients, the world's biggest esports teams, they were kind of struggling on the visa front. You've
Yeah.
probably seen in the news, like, this player unable to show up for this tournament because of visa issues. And so he was looking for someone who, specializes in immigration, and not just immigration, but is also familiar with, the gaming industry and esports, and who can, understand where the players are coming from, and most importantly, work as fast as the esports industry does.
Yeah.
Because lawyers, like traditional lawyers, tend to be pretty slow. Like, plenty of law firms still use snail mail and fax. So that's how I got into esports. Is I was young, I was zippy, and I did my work really fast, and I was a gamer, and all those things kind of made the perfect mix to become an esports immigration lawyer.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk more about esports immigration in a second, but I want to get a quick input from you. So, like, what are some various areas that lawyers can be in esports?
Oh my gosh, esports is full of lawyers. Like behind the scenes, there are a dozen lawyers just working on, if you're watching, let's say like the Overwatch grand finals,
Hmm.
there are probably a dozen or more lawyers who helped bring that together. So there are contracts lawyers. So you've got lawyers on the team side who are saying, hey, player, sign this contract. Then you've got the player's lawyer who's saying, no, 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 that's a bad deal. Don't sign this contract. Aside from those lawyers, each team usually has their own um, intellectual property or trademark lawyer, so people don't steal their logo
Hmm.
or their merchandise, rip off their merchandise. There are labor and employment lawyers, so that like teams aren't abusing the players, and making sure that they're getting paid the right wages and being taken care of. There are trial attorneys. So when people in the esports space sue each other, so if you guys remember Tifu v Face Clan,
Yeah.
there were plenty of lawyers involved in that. So lawyers are really everywhere. I mean, even every game publishers, they have an army of lawyers
Hmm.
inside, to just make sure that they're complying with all of the world's rules on what can go in a video game, what can't go in a video game. Um, Lawyers that work on sponsorship deals. So, let's say an esports team wants to partner with a chair company or
Hmm.
a drink company or, a shoe company. There are probably six lawyers on each side trying to facilitate and coming to an agreement about, how they want to work together.
Awesome. So that's all like great examples of why you need qualified lawyers in esports.
Yeah, and like it's not just good lawyers, but it's fascinating that you want lawyers who understand and are familiar with the gaming industry and the esports space. So, for example, there are plenty of instances where I'm on a conversation with an attorney who's on the other side, and they kind of have no idea what they're talking about. Like they might be an attorney with 10, 20 more years more experience than me, but they are actually not doing the best job of representing or advocating for their client because they don't know like how esports works, or
Hmm.
how, for example, like streaming revenue, right? Like players can make money by streaming from
Yeah.
Twitch. Well, an attorney who has no idea what Twitch is isn't going to know to say, hey, my client wants to keep all of his own Twitch revenue.
Ugh. And that can
Yeah.
be a lot.
Hmm.
Whew, okay, yeah. That's intense. Let's go back to immigration because this is your specialty. So you do a lot of work on visas. Can you explain why you need a lawyer for this?
Yeah, so you don't always need a lawyer. For example, if someone is just coming to the United States, let's say a player wants to go to Disneyland for a
Hmm.
week, he doesn't need a visa for that. He can just come as a tourist. Um, but anytime someone who's not a US citizen or permanent resident, if they want to work in the United States and get paid for that work, then they need a work visa. Otherwise, that's called working illegally or
Hmm.
working without authorization.
Okay. And that, I mean, we're in a remote system right now, so that even applies if you're in another country and working for a U.S. company, like on LCS broadcast, like that's still an issue.
That's a great question. So let's say someone is physically outside of the United States, like, LCS Studios is here in Los Angeles, but then they have a broadcast, let's say they have a caster in Denmark. That person is in Denmark. They don't need to, get on a plane and come
Hmm.
into the United States. So they don't need a visa. But even though, right now we're still in the middle of COVID-19 and a lot of the tournaments are, online and not in front of a live studio audience, the players actually still need to be in North America, right? For issues having to do with ping,
Hmm.
communication, time zones. Like you don't want, a team
Oh.
of five and having two of those players, competing at like 2 in the morning their time. They might not be in the optimal,
Yeah.
condition. And so it's actually really important for players to be physically in the same space. And if you're competing in the LCS, that means you need to compete within North America.
Okay. Awesome. Now, you mentioned earlier issues with visas sometimes taking a long time. We saw a lot of that in the LCS Spring Split, like Broxa not getting here for a long time. So, how long does the visa process generally take, like on average? Because there are definitely those extremes that we've seen.
Yeah. So I always tell my clients to expect a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. And that's a minimum. So, from the time that a team has signed a player and then they've come to me and said, okay, we want a visa for this person, I say, okay, like I need 6 to 8 weeks. But, knowing the esports industry, sometimes we don't get that much advance
No.
notice before a new league or a new title is released. And so sometimes I'm working, within the constraints of 4 weeks or less, and I just have to do my best to get someone in ASAP.
Okay. Now, does the process change heavily depending on where the player is trying to get their visa from? Because there's like EU, and there's many countries in the EU that you can come from, or Korea, China, or even Canada.
Yeah, I would say pre-COVID, it didn't really matter what country you're coming from, so
Hmm.
long as that country had diplomatic relations or a good relationship with the United States.
Hmm.
So, for example, there are countries that the United States does not talk to, like North Korea, right? Like, if you sign a North Korean player, I'm sorry, I can't get them a visa. But, if someone's from China, Russia, I've had clients from all over the world, Brazil, Argentina. There wasn't really a difference in the difficulty of getting them a visa. The thing you had to prove most to get your visa as an esports player is basically how good are you? How many awards have you won? How many championships are under your belt? How high are you ranked?
Hmm.
Have you competed in the World Cup? Things like that. So it doesn't really matter where you're from, it just matters like how well you perform and kind of what your reputation is. But that kind of changed post COVID because because of COVID-19, a lot of countries have gone on lockdown. So, for
Hmm.
example, the new strain of the virus kind of started in the United Kingdom, and so like England went on like a hard lockdown. Countries like Australia and New Zealand were really aggressive with kind of taking the virus down, and so they even put a rule into place that's still in existence now where if you are physically in Australia, you're not allowed to leave the country
Hmm.
unless you get special permission. So the challenge that I'm seeing right now is like, let's say um, I've got players in Korea. Korea's done a really good job of containing the virus. There aren't really a lot of lockdown issues. Everyone's required to wear a mask, and so the virus hasn't really spread. It's really easy for me to get visas
Hmm.
for players who are in Korea. On the other hand, for players in, let's say, Denmark, um, Denmark, there was like a terrorist attack a couple weeks ago, and so like the whole city, the whole country went on lockdown. And so I had visa appointments lined up for some clients that just got canceled at the last minute, and there's just no knowing when they're going to reemerge. And so it really depends on the COVID situation in each country.
Yikes. Okay. You mentioned in that answer that it sometimes depends on, the player's skill level and their renown.
Mhm.
So does that mean like players like the Oceania region in League of Legends kind of got dissolved? So there's a lot of players there. So does that mean it's going to be a lot harder for those players who don't have this opportunity to compete in their own region and get that renown to come here to
That
like
is
LCS?
absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Wow.
And so there's as I mentioned, a couple criteria that you'd have to meet in order to get an athlete visa in the United States. And a lot of them have to do with your competitive history. And so if you haven't had a chance to compete on an international stage, if you hadn't had a chance to really show your skills to the world, such that a dot esports or espn or dexerto is going to say like, wow, we watched this tournament and this player was amazing, he's like the next up and coming star player for this league. If you're not getting that exposure, it's going to be really difficult for me to get a visa for a client.
Wow. That's good to know. I didn't know that before.
Hmm.
So that's quite frustrating for a lot of those players, I imagine then.
Hmm.
Now, one thing I love about your work is that you're always talking about visa issues on Twitter. You have this great transparency. So why do you walk people through that process?
Yeah, I think I do it for two different reasons. One is for my clients. Obviously, going through the visa process and it causes a lot of anxiety, causes a lot of stress. And I think by sharing that information, it kind of helps them realize that they're not alone, that, I've got their back, and not only have I got their back, there are people who are liking and retweeting and commenting. And I think that helps my clients feel like, okay, well, it's not just me. It's not my fault that, I'm having visa issues. It's just the nature of the process. Um, so one reason is for my clients. Second reason is because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding
Mhm.
and kind of wrong assumptions about what U.S. immigration is like. The nationwide conversation is kind of focused on like illegal immigrants and how foreigners take American jobs, but I kind of want to remind the public that some of the most beloved public figures in the United States are actually not American. Like Justin Bieber, dude's a Canadian, right?
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds, Canadian. Like a lot of, the world's most beloved, stars and athletes, they're actually not American. And they all have to go through this really challenging hurdle of getting a visa. And so I feel like the more information I put out there, the more kind of people are brought back to reality. Like, oh, this person, they're just like me. They're a human being. They just happen to be born in a different country.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I love watching you do it on Twitter, so definitely keep doing it. So last question I have for you is, what kind of advice would you give those looking to pursue a career in law and in esports?
Sure. So what I always tell, students who ask me, how do I get a job in esports?
Hmm.
I would say, having that kind of larger goal of wanting to work in an industry you love, that's great. But I would actually take it a step back and think about, you love the esports industry so much. Try to think about what skills can you bring to the industry to make it better. So I think students are in a great position right now because esports is really still in its early stages, where you do have something to offer, whether it's you're amazing at social media,
Hmm.
people need social media managers. Um, Or maybe you love decorating, like whether it's decorating your room or decorating your house or decorating parties. Like that's actually a skill that you could develop and bring to the esports space. There are plenty of, major events in esports that require like those kinds of decorating skills. And so, I would say if you have a passion, like if you love music or if you love art or if you love reading and writing, don't feel like you have to change your passion
Hmm.
just to like fit it into the esports space. Keep doing what you're passionate about and developing that skill so that once you're like amazing at that, you have something to offer the esports industry and build it up. For example, like math. You might be amazing at math and you're like, what does math have to do with esports? It has
A lot.
everything to do with esports, whether it's data analysis or calculating probabilities. One of my favorite esports job is accounting. Like some of my best friends are esports accountants, right? Like you're doing taxes for,
Oh, no, thank you.
esports organizations and teams, and like, but accountants love it. They're like, I love numbers, I love esports, and so just be yourself, do what you love. And then I think when you do what you love, you tend to get really good at it.
Mhm.
And then that way you have something positive to bring to the esports industry.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, numbers there. Like, it's not just on the esports side; it's also like the game dev side or the balance team. Like, you can
Hmm.
be anywhere because those that's very it's a lot of math right
Hmm.
there to get like 0.001% more on that AP
Yes.
ratio or something. Like that is a
Yep.
calculation they have to make and they have to get it right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about today?
Um, I just wanted to, encourage students like just to put yourself out there, consume as much content as you can. The more, I think, the more that you pursue learning and personal development, the better person that you're going to be, and the more you're going to have to bring again to the esports space, to this industry that you love. And not to brag, it is an amazing feeling to wake up every day and like love my job,
Hmm.
right? Like I love being able to help people. I love being able to apply my law degree into this super fun and like constantly changing industry. Try do what you love, and that way your job won't feel like a miserable job. It'll feel like, your purpose in life, and kind of add another kick to your step when you wake up in the morning.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really enjoyed it. For everyone else out there, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.